Have you started collecting cassette tapes and are worried about spending your money on a used cassette tape that sounds bad? Did you know that if you buy a tape in bad condition, it could potentially damage your tape deck and the other tapes in your collection? Well, my name is Aaron and I've been buying cassettes for over 30 years now, and I've made a lot of mistakes that I want to share in this video to help you not waste your money when shopping for used cassettes. Now, here are 4 things that you can visually check for to hopefully make sure you're buying the best sounding cassette tape possible. And be sure to stick around to the end because I've got a bonus tip on what you should do before playing your cassette tape the very first time. Let's jump into that now. Quick note, I know a lot of my audience here on YouTube grew up in the peak cassette era, and they may jokingly say that the first mistake to avoid is to buy a cassette tape at all because it's not their favorite sounding format. That is a fair comment, and we're not going to get into what format sounds better in this video, but I grew up in the 90s and I still love collecting cassette tapes from bands of that era. Think grunge, alternative, indie rock, punk rock. I also sell a lot of used cassettes at record shows and in my vintage booth in an antique mall. So if you're anything like me and just like collecting tapes for the nostalgic fun of it, then be sure to keep watching because I'm going to start with the most important thing to check before you buy a used cassette first. The first thing I look for when buying a used cassette is I will remove the shell and simply look right here. I am looking to see if the felt pressure pad is still in place. I'm not sure if you can see here or not, but this one has actually come loose from the little piece of metal behind the tape. Now, this is important because we need this pressure pad to push the tape over the playhead so that your cassette deck can get all the information possible stored on the tape so that we can hear everything as it's intended. If that pad has fallen off, you're just not going to get the right pressure and the tape is simply going to sound bad. Now, you can buy kits to replace these felt pads, and it is not a complicated process. There's plenty of videos to show you how to do that on YouTube, so I won't spend time showing you how to do that here. You could buy a kit, I think, on Amazon for like 12 bucks. So it's going to be up to you whether or not you want to buy the tape and replace that felt pad or not. If it's a pretty common tape, like Bryan Adams here, there's a good chance that I'll just leave the tape behind and not even bother. If it were a really collectible tape, I might still actually buy the tape if it's a good price and swap that felt pad, especially if it's something that's really hard to find. But common tapes with no pads, I often just simply leave them behind. Now, one more thing to note, if you own a lot of used cassettes and one starts to sound worse than you remember when you first bought it, pull it out and look and see if that pressure pad is still there because over time they all fall off and they all need replacing. So that's another quick tip if you've got a lot of used cassettes and one kind of starts to sound bad. But the pressure pad is probably one of the most important things you can look for when shopping for used cassettes. Now, this second tip is sort of obvious, and it's embarrassing for me to admit that I've made this mistake before, but I'm going to share it with you because it happens especially if you're in a rush. Now, a lot of record stores or thrift stores, they're going to get large collection of tapes all at once. They're most likely just going to price them as quick as possible and put them out there. So my second tip is to make sure the tape you have bought is actually the right one that's in the shell. I know that sounds silly, but look, I bought this tape, this NWA tape. I got so excited it was near the counter, I just simply grabbed it. And what ended up happening is that the tape inside is actually different than the cover. Now, it's an NWA tape, but it's just wrong. I know. And I know it's so dumb that I didn't check it when I bought it, but I mean, I spent $7 on this, which is kind of embarrassing. And again, I just got in a hurry and I didn't think to check. I was shopping for tapes this weekend and I found one that I thought looked great. And the first thing I did was when I was looking at the pressure pad, as I mentioned earlier, I realized that it was not actually the right tape inside the case. So I know that sounds silly, but if you are anything like me and you're always out shopping and you can get in a hurry, just slow down and make sure that the tape you think you are buying is actually the one inside the case. This next tip might be the most important. When you are looking at the cassette shell, you want to spend a lot of time just studying this area right here, looking at the tape on the reels, you want to check to make sure there's no mold. Now, mold is going to show up on a cassette tape. It looks like a white powder. It can either be a lot of mold or even just a little bit. Now, the reason why you don't want to play a tape that's moldy is because that mold can stick to the playhead in your cassette deck and not only potentially ruin the tape head in your deck, but also transfer to your other clean cassettes where that mold is then going to grow on the reels that was transferred to it. It's going to ruin all of your tapes. There are a lot of videos that show you how to clean a moldy cassette tape. I tried once with a Walkman and a Q-tip and it did not go well. So I generally never buy tapes that are moldy, and I promise you, you will find them out there. When I'm at flea markets, I often find tapes and I'm like, yes, I really need this for my collection. Pull it out and it's just caked in mold. I put it back and leave it behind. It's up to you whether or not you want to try to buy one and clean it, but for me, I just let them go, and I don't want to risk getting any of my other tapes or my cassette deck moldy. This last tip was something that just happened to me that I had never happened before. And what I did was, while I was shopping for a cassette, I saw a sort of heavy metal rock cassette that I thought looked interesting. It was $8. And I pulled it out to do the usual inspection for a mold and pressure pad. And when I looked at the bottom of the tape, it was actually bent. The top part was so bent that it would have never even fit into my cassette deck to play in the first place. Now again, stores get in a hurry, they just price things and put them out. Nobody probably noticed, but I'm glad I checked that, because for a minute I might have just thrown that into my basket, paid $8, gotten it home, and realized that I couldn't play it at all. So just always slow down, take a little bit of time just to look at the shell overall and make sure there's not any obvious things that are going to make the cassette perform poorly when you bring it home and try to play it. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I promised a bonus tip on what to do with your tape before you play it. I have found that old cassette tapes often get a little jammed up. The first thing I do is I will insert it into my tape deck, and I will simply fast forward it and rewind it, fast forward it and rewind it a couple of times just to sort of loosen up that tape. It's sort of like letting it stretch before a light jog, I guess. But I just kind of want to get those reels moving, get the tape moving, just so that it's not kind of all jammed up and just going to sound crunchy. I think that that kind of helps it bring it back to life a little bit and get it ready for the best playback possible. After buying cassette tapes for over 30 years now, I can't give you 100% certainty that the tape you buy in the store when you get it home won't still sound a little warbly in parts. It's just impossible to visually inspect the entire reel of tape that's within the shell and know 100% that it's going to sound great. But at least these 4 tips will give you some things to visually look for, and just make sure you don't make a simple, easy mistake while you're shopping. Now, if you'd like to know a little bit more information about the cassette decks that I use that I think sound the best when playing cassettes, then be sure to check out my comparison of 2 Nakamichi decks that I restored last year. If you'd be interested in checking out that video, you can do so by clicking here.